scroll down there, Superintendent Berg. We can jump to the next one too. So project scope, that's there. Just kind of a brief reminder, we have some challenges at this particular site with the loading dock configuration, the inability to position the required waste containers that are now required by Dakota County along our current configuration, as well as some other kind of ergonomic challenges with staff being able to load current dumpsters and current dumpsters having to be placed in the paved parking lot area, which has caused vehicular damage over the years as well. Nothing really has changed in terms of the overall design of this project since our last meeting. However, I did mention that we were still working through some final details with utilities at that last meeting. Since then, we have received some information from Dakota Electric. There is an electrical transformer immediately to the north of that dock, and due to some clearance and kind of workability requirements that they have in terms of access, should they need to work at it, we are having to do a little bit of regrading and also add a retaining wall on the far north side to give them a level surface to work at. We're being pretty conservative, we believe, but that would add estimated right now probably around $35,000 to $40,000 potentially in additional cost. So I did update the budget there. We would still continue to fund this the same way, so utilizing the remainder of the 2015 bonds, and then should we need to adjust, or actually if that $40,000 additional were to come to fruition, we would have to take that out of buildings and grounds capital funds. Still being optimistic, but we're going to account for it just in case. So that's the only thing that has changed. We would like to look to take this project out for bid and put us in a position to move forward and get this wrapped up over the course of the summer before students return. So I don't know if there are any additional questions that folks have.
My only question is, and it sounds like you answered it as you spoke, but you said there's additional costs and you feel it's counted for with existing other pockets of money.
Yep, correct.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? All right, so if there are no further questions, can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve administration going out for bid for the Aiken Road Elementary Loading Dock project as presented.
Second.
Motion by Simmons, second by Doyle. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, Dan. Our next item under administrative action is the resolution related to $41.3 million in general obligations school building refunding bonds, Series 2023A. Jane, and we have a guest.
Yeah, Shelby from Ellers, I think, is going to drive the car on this one. So welcome, Shelby.
Thank you. All right, well, thanks for coming along with us on this refunding ride as interest rates are increasing. We did find a spot in the market where we thought it would be worthwhile to take this competitively and save the taxpayers some dollars, and that came to fruition today. So bonds were sold this morning. 8 bids you received, your bonds, so that was nice to see all those bidders come out and look to purchase the bonds. And so I have some of the details included here, and okay, perfect, you're on the right page. So just a little bit of the summary. It was a pretty big refunding of your 2014A bonds, so about $41 million. You received a pretty big premium, which we'd estimated some amount of premium in the pre-sale that Jane had gone through last month, but we did receive even a bigger one than that, which reduces your borrowing amount of what you need in order to pay off the old bonds. The future value savings then we're looking at is a little over $900,000. So pre-sale, we were thinking about less than $500,000. So nice to double that, and not where we were thinking they were when rates were extremely low, but really nice to capture the savings right now. So the plan is to close on those bonds on March 9th, and then we would redeem the old ones on April 11th. And so a period of time where you can invest in those funds. So the next few pages then just show the bidders that came in today. So Bank of America Securities was the winning bid at 2.59, and then you can see like national attention really from all over, all sides of the US. So LA, Dallas, Charlotte, New York, Florida, Chicago, and Baird won a few of the other bonds today. So didn't come in with the low bid on yours. So a few schedules included, but I'll take Jason to the debt service comparison page. So what this does is reduce your, so page 6 of the attachments.
Is it this one?
Yeah, so what this is going to do is lower your levy each year, aside from some moderate amount of state aid that you get for your debt service equalization. And so you had planned on levying for, in taxes payable 2024 through 2026, an amount to cover the debt service payments, and now you'll have savings in each of those years. And then the last page, then the next page just shows you'll be able to generate some interest in between when the bonds close and when you have to redeem your the old bonds. So through this process, Jane guided us through the most efficient and best performance of a rating call we have seen yet, and you were awarded or affirmed that A1 underlying rating. So really nice that we can be quite as efficient and get Moody's through this rating to get you to the point of issuing the bonds and selling the bonds and getting that information out to the underwriters and bondholders. So thank you, Jane and Jason, for your time. That was really, really great to watch that go through. So that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions. Your official action tonight is your resolution from Andrea Hedke.
Okay. Any questions? I mean, it's kind of an easy one, right?
Yeah.
Vote yes, save $920,000.
Yes, please. Sounds great.
And more than we thought.
Yeah,
And,
great.
yeah, and I know we had quite a bit of discussion around this, at the end of January when we first kind of dug into this. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm glad
Yeah,
things worked
absolutely.
out. I guess we just need a motion on this resolution.
I'll make a motion to forego the reading and adopt the resolution relating to 41.3 million general obligation school building refunding bonds, Series 2023A, authorizing issuance, awarding sale, prescribing the form and details, and providing for the payment thereof as presented.
Second.
Motion by Simmons, second by DeWilde. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. Motion passes.
All right.
That takes care of our administrative actions.
Yeah,
Thank you so
roll
much,
call.
Shelley. Thank you. And thank you, Jane and Jason, for identifying the opportunity and bringing that forward. So now that we've saved some money, our next item, we move into the work session topics, and that first item is the 2023-2024 budget discussion. This is a good discussion. I know there's been a lot of work by the Finance Committee on, well, actually all of you, around the Finance and Long-Term Planning Committee, but also you, and analyzing the legislative proposals, which is, in various states, mostly disarray, I would say, but a tough place. And so we're trying to figure out how any of that may or may not impact the 2023-2024 discussion, and then all kinds of impacts, both between now and the end of the academic year, but also potentially into the end of the year if we decide we need to go to a referendum. So I'll shut up and let you talk.
Well, I'll drive a little bit here, and then Becky and Jacqueline and Jane can feel free to kind of pipe in. So this has been an interesting process here because we've done a significant amount of work prior than we've ever had to in the past, right? Knowing that based on modeling last year at this time that we'd be running a deficit, so want to be planful in that. But following a typical timeline, this is when the board first starts discussing the parameters for the budget, which typically is around enrollment. What do we think we're going to get in state aid? Those are usually the two big things because that drives a lot of it. Additional things that have been added to the discussion since last year, things like special ed cross-subsidy, multilingual cross-subsidy. So we've been kind of, not guessing, but taking the information at hand and doing the best we can. But as we get closer to the legislative session starting and then the legislative moving along, we can kind of hone that in. So just a quick review, right? Long-range planning is designed to illustrate what may happen as we go through. I know that members of the board are fairly familiar with kind of school finance, and it comes in different buckets, it comes at different times, and ultimately, we don't know where we land with the year until we go through our audit. And so we do the best we can up until that point in time, but there's always gonna be variation. What the long-range plan does and the model does is gives us an opportunity to manipulate different parameters and see what those outcomes may be. As a reminder, the board does have a fund balance policy, so this is the unassigned fund balance of 8 to 12%, and currently we are right around 9%, so very healthy fund balance. Again, another historical kind of picture for things. You can see what the general aid, and this is where a majority of a district's funding is generated through that per pupil formula, and you can see, you know, it's gone anywhere between really 1% and 2%. The governor's proposal is 4% this year, 2% next year. There's other proposals in the legislative and bodies. I think it's one in the Senate right now that's 5% and 5%. So there's some variability in terms of what they're thinking, but at least at some point it's supposed to be potentially higher than the 2% that we have been getting. But this gives you kind of a historical perspective of where that has been and really what we generate per student as the main driver of our revenue. Again, where we are after our last audit, our assigned fund balance is about $7.9 million. Our unassigned fund balance is about $7.9 million. That just was lucky that they ended up that way. So kind of cool if you like things like that. The unassigned
You like
is
symmetry?
right around 9%. And we had there's a little note down there with 3 little stars. Not all funds sitting our assigned fund balance are available for general purpose. That's made up of lots of different things. Some of that is statutory. Other buckets, the board has made decisions that we will use this for X or Y. One of the things that is sitting in an assigned fund balance is buildings and grounds. So we set aside some money for them to purchase different things, and part of what they're going to use for Aiken Road is some of that money. So there's different things in there. The board can always make the choice to move the designations and use it for something else, or move it into the unassigned fund balance if need be. When we started this process and kind of did the modeling and kind of landed on, all right, our best guess back in October of where we think we're going to be, we were projecting a deficit of about $7 million based on really, really conservative parameters, and we'll take you through what that was in a second. And the board had kind of made the loose decision to use 1.9 of that assigned fund balance to take that down to about a $5 million deficit. Which then administration and the finance committee set to work on beginning to identify what would $5 million in reductions look like throughout the district. So this hopefully looks, or may not look familiar. I'll try to make it bigger, sorry, for those of you that are watching at home. But these were the parameters that we started with. Again, based on historical data of, about 2% the last 6 or 7 years. We decided to go conservative, go 1.5 on the general ed formula. And just if you're thinking about, okay, 1% is about $500,000-ish for the district. So, I mean, it's nice to get that, but it's not a game changer when you come to talk about the big impact. And that's been our general funding through that. We did use across all of our expenditures kind of a 5-year average of our internal inflation rate that takes account of everything, of 4.62%. So again, you didn't have to be really good in my Algebra 2 class back in the day to figure out that if you're getting 2%, then your expenses go up 4.6%. At some point in time, you're going to be going backwards, which is what happens to basically every district in the state of Minnesota at some point in time, even if you have a levy, it just eats away at it. And then this model takes into account, we actually put into the model the 1.9 million from the assigned fund balance, and you can see underneath the 2023-24, about $5.1 million. And that's where we went and got to work. So then we started to get some more information, and the finance committee met multiple times to kind of talk about some new modeling and provide some different ideas for the board to discuss tonight about, okay, where do we want to land on parameters? Because ultimately we need the board to approve budget parameters at the meeting on the 27th. so that we can then move forward with the rest of the things that the district needs to do. So you'll see that we are leaving the enrollment constant. The Gen Ed, this is the governor's fully fund, fully fund K-12 education. You can see it's 4% next year, 2% the following year. This suggests buying down the special ed cross subsidy to 50%. In 2021, ours was about $8.1 million. And then the last time, we kind of run a year behind. Coming out of COVID, our expenditures weren't quite the same, so it's like 6.3, something like that. The multilingual cross subsidy to 25%, that sounds really great, but they don't fund our multilingual learners very much. It's like $28 a kiddo, so 25% on that really doesn't, we like it, but it really doesn't have an impact. Still using that 4.62%, and then we did have additional revenue that we've certified. The state has changed how they award and kind of evaluate their comp ed revenue. If you think about free and reduced meals, things people or families that qualify for that, it used to be a form that people had to fill out. They've gone to a electronic verification using Medicaid and some other things in addition to the form, which is casted a wire net, which is perfect, right? We'd be able to support more families, which then more families identify, the more comp ed revenue, so it's 1 point. So we know that that is going to come in, so that, we called that specifically out because that wasn't a part of it before, but that's in there. So if we take the governor's proposal that to fully fund education, you can see right here, it's about $2.5 million deficit. Now that does not take into account any assigned or unassigned fund balance. That's strictly deficit. Then I said, Jane, well, let's look at this. What happens if we say, you know what, we don't worry about putting anything on the percent. We keep everything else the same, and they fully, and I don't care who it is, whether it's the state government or the federal government, they fully fund the special ed cross subsidy. What does that look like? And you can see that that's by far the biggest impact on our district and a majority of districts. So we go from, a $2.5 million deficit in the previous one where it's 50% and 4 and 2 to, basically balanced. It's $418,000 deficit in there. So you can see that is very significant to have that taken. And that gives us a little bit of an idea. If they go at all above 50%, anything above that just eats into our deficit, even if they take away the per pupil funding. And then we were like, okay, well, let's do one that's kind of conservative. Well, it's not a huge change from the governor's proposal. We have a feeling that the governor's is going to be closer to the floor than anything, but this gives us a little bit of an idea if you mess around. So enrollment stays the same. Gen Ed formula is 3 and 2. SPED cross subsidies 50%, MLs 25%, and internal inflation stays the same, comp ed stays the same, so it's a deficit of about $3 million. So where we were in the fall at a deficit of about $7 million, I think our modeling and based on the best information right now is probably anywhere between $2 and $3 million, and that does not include using any of our assigned fund balance. So more than happy to answer if anybody has any questions over the models, what these mean, things like that. But we need to kind of hone in so we can bring back parameters next week. And one of the parameters we've never really talked about is, special education cross subsidy. We've never talked about that. So I think we're going to want to make sure that we build that in some way, shape, or form, in addition to Gen Ed formula, attendance, and I'm sorry, not attendance, but enrollment and those sorts of things. So
I've got a couple questions, but I'll hold for others.
Jason's gonna, and Jane will explain it far better than I feel like I can. I don't know about you, Becky.
The recommendations, you mean, like of the
Yeah,
parameters
and
to consider?
I kind of will wait to see what questions people have, and then we can talk more about what we talked about during finance committee.
Yeah, go with some
Okay, I'll start off with my questions. First of all, Can you remind me what the assigned fund balance that we voted on last year to include in the budget parameters was specifically set aside for, from the 2015 operating levy for like these moments, right? To keep class sizes low, pay staff
To
salaries.
maintain, yeah,
in
to
the out-
maintain class size and to, I think the two main purposes were to try to maintain that class size and then also bridge the gap from the end of the, to the end of the levy, because.
Which is 2025, correct?
Yeah, would be the end of it.
Okay. I'm trying to remember what the total amount was at the time, or what is the,
It's about 2 million, 1.9.
there's 2 million in there right now?
About.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, so at the end of the audit of June 30 of '22, there's $4 million, but we're gonna use 2 for the 22-23 school year, so there'll be 2 left for the 23.
After the current academic
Yes.
year. That's what I was trying to
Yep.
remember. I
Yep.
knew there was a couple
There's
of these
about
things
2 million
strung
left,
together, okay. And that would then, moving forward with what we agreed to in the last session or last year, would exhaust those
If we-
assigned funds for
Yep.
maintaining class sizes. I'm just making sure I say
Yeah,
it
we have
correctly.
about $1.9, $2 million-ish to play with out of that assigned fund balance.
So that would get us through 2024, really, and then we would start digging into, assuming we had to.
Sure.
Depending on, and then, of course, depending on how much future deficits, what future deficits hold, we would start digging into unassigned fund balance, because the other assigned fund balances are things like the iPad sale, like there was $1 million in there and some other things like that, right? Okay. just
Classroom technology, because we don't have a fund for that, and buildings and ground, those are kind of the main big ones, right?
Okay. My other question is, when looking at the different legislative proposals into these assumptions, there are some other proposals that cost money, and I asked a little bit, I don't know if you're ready to answer to this or not, but I'm going to say it out loud.
You can, I get to tell you we're not, but yes.
Yeah, that's fair. But the big question I have is, there are legislative proposals right now that are also new unfunded mandates. And the biggest one that I know of, I think, is, one of the biggest potential is probably the paid family medical leave. Correct me if I'm wrong, or if there's other proposals that are more costly, but that one is, and I'm not making a statement on the
No,
merits of
potentially,
it, but.
because I believe, right, the way I think it's funded for,
So it's the unemployment's gonna be funded for 2
okay,
years.
the unemployment, okay, that
Yeah,
was the wrong one.
I did it
Because
wrong
that's
this
another
morning,
one too,
too.
that
It's gonna bite us.
potentially is the hourly workers
During the summer.
During
which
the
is
summer
Not
could
something I fully understand.
qualify for unemployment insurance. And that would be funded for 2 years, but then after that,
It's
we would
actually
be.
tax.
That it would be on the district.
Okay. So we don't have a view to what paid family medical leave might cost our
No,
district.
we started talking about it this morning, but
I'm sure it's hard.
gonna take us a while it'll take us this week to figure it out.
Okay. Same vein, I know that the House has passed, I'm not sure if the Senate has yet, but the free school lunches for all students. Does that have any effect to this at all, or is that mostly since, in theory, everyone's paying, it's sort of either paid by aid, compensatory aid, or fees, right? So hypothetically, and I know that's not the case, because some families can't pay for their school lunches for a period of time, and this will be run a balance. But hypothetically, that wouldn't necessarily affect these
No, it's because
projections, right?
it's minimal, right? It's about $20,000 a year that hits our general fund for unpaid meals. So it's pretty minuscule, so no. And there's other things too, like we talked with a few board members that came in, because you'll hear things around like mental health supports, counselors, things like that. There's gonna be ancillary revenue that will come in that are gonna have strings tied to it that may or may not be a benefit to, how we are able to offset some of the costs and things like that. But there also might just be new positions that if you want to access these dollars, you can't use it to offset anything else. It needs to be new positions. So in that case, it's technically revenue neutral because it's not helping us. But we might be in a case where we're adding positions because we get certain streams and buckets of money while we're reducing in other areas. And until they really get the whole package done, we're not gonna know. And we're still, the other big part is too, like we're estimating, we're modeling, we're still waiting for the district runs, because what they'll do is when the bills are fully introduced, which they're still waiting on a little bit, then MDE will run a district run and say, based on this, here's what it looks like. So we get a better idea around some of those things. But I think, and Jane can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for the most part, we have the big things in here that are gonna impact and drive kind of the budget. There might be some things that are a little bit, add a little bit and take away, but I think these are gonna be the big things.
I would agree.
Okay, thank you.
So do we have something that actually says if we get 100% of our cross-subsidy sped and a 2% on the gen ed, does that get rid of the $500,000 deficit?
Yeah, 2% would actually be about $1 million, so it would be 500,000 to the good.
Okay.
Approximately.
Yeah, we just ran the 100% just to see the true
Right.
impact, just that would be, but yeah.
Okay.
And also to tell the story that it's more important for us to get money in the cross-subsidy than to get it on the general fund.
Understood.
Yeah, the reality is, as long as there continues to be things that are required and not covered that are supposed to be covered, anything that gets put on percents and things like that over time, and usually over a period of 10 years that typically districts have levies, are going to get eaten up and swallowed up by those unfunded mandates.
I'm just looking at the projections further out.
Well, just one thing with the projections further up, it's a little bit, that they take into account that you didn't do anything. So it's just, it's rolling forward, the 2.5, you didn't do anything.
Enrollment didn't change,
in-
the
yeah,
same
nothing like that,
assumptions.
so.
Yeah, I wasn't going too far out. I was just looking to 2024, 2025, and kind of looking at the next. I mean, I understand.
Yeah, well, the next, I mean, so again, right, I mean, I think if we land on some parameters, we can always bring back models then and say that this is the reduction that we need to make, and then we can put in the reduction and see the impact that has it down the road. What does that do?
So the parameters tonight that the administration needs and we'll discuss as a board are ultimately what assumptions to operate under for this year's budget, in addition to what, if any, amount of an assigned fund or unassigned fund balance we would want to use to offset some of the deficit. Okay.
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so the question for me comes back to the first question I asked around the assigned fund balance, with the amount of money in that, and whether or not, when we leave that on the sidelines, if that gets us to our 2025 goal. I mean, I think about, the foremost priority around ensuring that we're staffed right, we're equipped right. But I also know there's the tension then of ensuring that we're good stewards of the tax dollars that were committed in 2015. And I've always been uncomfortable with the prospect of going to referendum in 2023 for something that should have lasted 2 more years. So that's just the set of factors that I've got in front of, in front of my head right now. So, I don't know.
Yeah, Kyle, I appreciate that perspective because, yeah, that is what the voters voted for. And I understand, like, no one really knows what's going to happen in legislation. We all know what happened last spring when nothing happened. So then, I think something will happen, but we don't know. I know that I'm definitely feeling more confident looking at these 3 proposals we're kind of looking at here don't include taking money from the unassigned fund balance because as I see it, I don't think we should be touching that. It's at 7.9 and I think the minimum amount, if I look back at the last finance at 8% would be 7.1 million. And so I'm like, ooh,
Yeah,
I don't know that we should be touching that. So I like the fact that we're not.
barring a referendum that fails, I agree, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's truly emergency situation.
Right. So, yeah, and budget realignment doesn't really sound fun. But also in contemplating a lot of this, I was remembering when Bree gave her community ed, how she was so proud that, you know, because of COVID, like, their funds, like, were drastically impacted, and they went through this huge process, and we were so proud of her for leading her team through that, and, like, making this huge turnaround, which was, I'm sure, completely hard and uncomfortable. But yeah, I don't know, that exercise, if you've ever done it in your personal budget even, like, it's good. It shows you, like, what you spend money on is what you value, and we can make sure, like, we're following in line with our strategic plan and what we value. So,
Does the finance committee then have a recommendation of which of these scenarios have you guys brought a recommendation for us of we should use 1 million from the assigned fund balance and work off of these parameters? Or is there, I guess, a proposal that you guys think is best for us to consider as a board?
I think we specifically just talked about the three, obviously not the, I mean, it's on here, but the fully funded one is a little unrealistic. If we're being realistic, that's a little unrealistic, but I think these were the ones that we narrowed it down because Jane could have given you you know what I mean? She could have come up with every scenario possible, so.
So we're looking at the one, right, as the assumption of a $2.5 million operating deficit for 23-24. Would you, I guess, as a committee, recommend that we consider all of that in reductions, or because we had planned on 1.9 million initially from the assigned fund balance, using all or a portion of that now that we're working under different assumptions?
So we talked a little bit about this, and Jane and I spent a lot of time talking about this. I mean, it's a little bit of a bet. I mean, that's the hard part, right? I think realistically, it's going to be around the governor's proposal in some way, shape, or form, if not lower. If they're able to do something with that, so I think if we've talked about buckets and things like that, so we shared buckets at the last meeting to get to 5. I think if it's 3 million, that takes off, a few things. I think to get to 3 million, we're still going to have to increase our class size ratio by 1 to do that. I don't think we can get to 3 without doing that. So my wondering is if it's 2.5 million, 2.6 million, 2.4 million, even if it's 2.3 million, if you make $2 million in alignment and you hold off and just don't do your staffing ratio this year, and whatever it is over 2 million comes out of the assigned fund balance, which, could be $1 million if you look at the conservative thing. Could be, it could be more, there's no doubt about that. But I think after making an adjustment to class size ratio last year, it would be nice not to have to do that in consecutive years.
So sorry, does the conservative model mean the class sizes stay the same as they are right now?
Yes, no,
Or is it a +2 or a +1?
it would be a +1 from where we are now.
And we did that already last year,
So last year we were so you have to remember, so thank you to the 2015, we were actually 1 under, and we were 1 under for a number of years. And then last year,
to
it
our
was a
policy.
+1, but it got us back to
Policy.
Yeah,
what the parameters were. To get to 3 million, we are gonna have to, we're not gonna be able to do it without the +1 to the staffing ratio.
but if we wanted to preserve the class sizes as they are for this year, it wouldn't exhaust the full almost 2 million, it'd be approximately 1 million, would you think?
Right, you're betting, because because the hard part is, like, we have our timelines and decisions that we have to make, especially around staffing, we have to make those decisions and communicate with people, drop dead is like April 14th, right? And then the board approves that at the end. It is clear that, and Kyle, talked about this in the couple of articles we wrote, right? When there's something that they're really excited about, they have no trouble passing that and getting that through. I don't see an education bill coming through in a timely fashion until the end. So no matter what we do, we're gambling in one way, shape, or form. You're either gambling and making $5 million in reductions or $3 million in reductions, and it could be $2 million. It could be $1 million. To Melissa's point, I mean, it could be no million, right? And then you try to unring that bell, or the other way is that you try to figure out where you think it's gonna land, you figure out what those reductions are, and then you basically bet some of your assigned fund balance on that you're gonna cover whatever that is. If it's 2.5, is $500,000, in my personal opinion, you guys have to make the decision, in my personal opinion, that's a worthy investment out of that fund. It still keeps money in there. Is $1 million, that's a little bit tougher, but I think to maintain the class size, it might be. To use all $2 million when it's just $3 million, no, not at all. But when it was $7 million, then you're like, whoa, $7 million, we won't function. So, I mean, there's just, it's risk tolerance, and hate to say this any way, you gotta bet a little bit. And there's no, Becky said, she's right. We bet last year on getting $500,000. We didn't get it. This is a funding year, though. We know, they have to do something with funding this year. They can't not do anything.
Okay. Everyone's looking at me, I feel.
I'm just looking at the screen.
Well, my preference is to dip into the assigned fund balance the least amount.
Yeah,
I think when we were looking at $7 million deficit and we agreed to 1.9, what's the percent? 40% was gonna come out of the assigned fund, did I say assigned fund balance? Unassigned, whatever, I'm mixing syllables up, but the assigned fund balance, right? So, I feel like we have an obligation to make sure that I think some of the cuts that we're talking about are probably things that we didn't need to make because there was so much money flowing through the district through the COVID years. And we might have made some of those cuts based on some of the changes in I guess enrollment is probably the biggest issue, right? So, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is we'd committed 1.9. I'm comfortable committing some, but not a, and I'm not sure it's one either. So I'll toss that out for a conversation. I get it's a bet and now it feels like a bidding process, but this is also a consensus process, so I need to lay out where I'm at.
Is the general
That's
feel
helpful.
that everyone is in favor of taking some from that pot?
I do.
We're in a situation where we have to.
Okay, right. So what I'm hearing is that number that everyone's projecting is somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million. Is that a safe assumption? Is anyone thinking more than that or less than that?
Are we looking at the governor's proposal to fully fund?
I think I'm looking at the conservative model based on current information.
like the third one?
Yeah, the third one. That's
So
what I'm looking
it
at.
sounds like there's sort of two debates. So the first debate is which one of these three models are we going to follow the most closely with? And the second question being, how much are we willing to pull from our fund balance, correct? Okay. Does it make sense to continue any debates on which one of the three models we're in agreement to follow?
I just wanted to verify which one you were looking at.
I'm looking at conservative model. I think that's the one that's probably the most realistic,
Agreed.
at least for planning purposes.
I agree.
I would agree with that as well.
I agree.
I would like to think that it's going to be fully fund special education and fulfill the rhetoric of the election year, but that doesn't seem like it's in the cards either, so.
So we're all working off of that as we're thinking,
Yeah.
okay, great. Okay.
And just to add to that, we know that, and again, this is just as you think about what potentially what might come from the unassigned fund balance if the board decides to use that. It's gonna be hard to kind of pigeonhole right now exactly because it's still going. But, there's a bill of 5% and 5%, in the House too, so.
I have no idea, don't ask me. I tried to give them my crystal ball and they said no, so.
Yeah, to me,
Fair
I feel
enough.
a little more optimistic. I think for the purposes of planning, we have agreed to err on the side of conservative because of what happened last year. We'd rather plan for the worst-case scenario and hope for the best. But that said, I am in favor of using a portion of our assigned fund balance as we had originally planned, especially to preserve class sizes, because we had the increase last year, the impact to our teachers and our, I think our families heard that last year too, had concerns around that. So I think that as part of that commitment to the original levy would be maintaining the promise that we indicated at that time and how we would use and direct those funds while also preserving an amount to ideally get us through.
Is there an amount that we would need to hit to maintain those classroom sizes
It's about $1 million.
in the deficit? Or that we need to utilize out of the assigned fund balance?
It's about $1 million, yeah. So when you look at it, like I said, I think we have $5 million in reductions that we set aside. We've prioritized them and peeled them back, right? And then basically, we looked at this and then narrowed it down and said that it's probably more realistic that we're gonna have to make $3 million in reductions rather than 5. And so then the first one we would peel off would be the class size, which is about $1 million.
So
So again, it would depend on which model you look at, Melissa,
If we're looking at the conservative model.
Yep.
And we shave off $1 million off of that deficit, which now puts it at $2 million by
Yep.
using the assigned fund balance, are we able to maintain classroom sizes based on that?
our ratio would stay the same as it this year. Is that what you're asking? Sorry.
Do we need, so what I'm hearing in that too is there a need to dictate that if we do say that we're going to use money from our fund balance specifically for that, do we get to prioritize that project is not cut? Do we have say in that?
Well, here's the thing.
Because on the chopping block are several things that
Right.
are gonna be really polarizing topics. Are we allowed to say, if we agree that you can use $1 million from our fund balance, are we saying that that gets taken for that project first before the other cuts come? Do we have the authority to say that?
We would say yes, right? I mean, if we're looking at that and we're saying it's a $3 million reduction, and we're saying that we have all this down and it's 1 million to buy class size, we wouldn't touch class size. Is that what you're
Right.
asking?
Yes, yep, that's what she's asking.
And we can say that?
Yes.
And-
Yeah, we would.
Okay.
That would, well, here's the
If they're
rea-
saying we
So
need,
that's
they need
protected.
$1 million and we give them $1 million,
And we
they're
say-
saying,
Yeah.
well, we won't touch classroom
Yeah,
sizes.
so what would happen
That's
is.
part of our parameters.
Exactly. Well, no, it actually, no.
I get to
it-
know where my money
it-
goes.
It actually would be part of your parameters, so when we bring it next week, right, if we were to move forward and say, we just need to move forward with $3 million in reductions, I'm telling you right now that we'd have to increase class size by one. When we give you parameters, they would actually be +1 from what they were last year. If you say, whatever one we're gonna go on, we're anticipating this, but we're gonna buy down, I should say potentially too, because we don't know where it's gonna shake out, but we're gonna potentially buy down the class size, and that would be $1 million to buy down. When we bring the parameters back, they would be the same as they were. The key is that once we start that ball rolling down the road, we can't come back in March and be like, oh, we want that $1 million back, because all of the planning that goes.
Right, well,
That.
that's what, I was gonna ask what the sequence of votes is. So we approve parameters on the 27th. Like, we agree, you start planning, come back, 27th, we agree to the parameters.
Yep.
Right? Then some stuff happens.
Yep.
You start making things go, and in April, there's another vote, right?
Yep.
And that's when we approve like is that the work session or the business meeting at the end of the
It
month?
would be the business meeting, and you
Oh,
would.
there's only one. So-
Yeah, it would come through the personnel action.
Okay,
So anybody that.
the approved, okay, got it.
And again, there's lots of personnel action that takes place at that time. There's non-renewals for different reasons and things like that, but that would come through at that time. We have to notify staff by, I think it's April 15th or April 14th.
No, well, there's statutory time.
Yeah. Okay, so, go ahead.
There's statutory timelines for notifying teachers, and we need to notify the probationary teachers by that board meeting in April in case we have to also lay off tenured staff, which the timelines are later, but you've got to, there's some timelines within that. So we got to lay off probationary teachers by this board meeting in April.
And so where the opportunity to, from the term claw back assigned fund balance would be if we know something new from the legislature because they passed new laws and the governor signed them and it changed our assumptions. Okay, so and we have those opportunities really until June 30th.
Finalize the budget.
Because you're gonna make different hiring decisions. I'm just saying, let's just say they passed 100% special ed cross subsidy and 5% on the formula, and we're now talking about restoring capital budgets and investing in all kinds of stuff. Let's pretend that gumdrops are falling out of the
Yeah,
sky.
we can, right, we can.
That's
we
the
can-
gumdrop model.
Yeah. We can do, most certainly, we can do that. I think, and I've said this before, right? My biggest fear is tearing things down if we don't need to tear them down.
Right.
And I know you know this, but that's a little bit of the gamble, right? You can, I mean, we can most certainly, let's say it's 3 million, we can move forward with 3 million, do our +1, make all those adjustments, wait until we see what happens from the governor's proposal, and then start to build that back up during the summer. But, you know, in the meantime, you know, you lose staff and things like that. I mean, you can hire people back, but it might not be the same people. So there's just some of that stuff that we'd prefer, you know, not to if we don't have to.
And we have $2 million in the assigned fund balance. God, I keep doing that, assigned fund balance. All right, I know where I'm at. I'll hear others though. Oh, actually, student representatives, what do you think?
Well, first of all, thank you for your patience. I had some car troubles, so that's why I was late. Hit you at the right time, but I don't really have much to add on finances. This is my first work session, but I appreciate hearing all your concerns.
I'd like to say that it's a really great thing that you guys are focusing a lot on the class size and things like that, because even from the student perspective, one extra student does not seem like crazy, but then if you think about your teachers and maybe them taking a long time to grade your work, well, they have more students to deal with these like 10-page essays and things like that. So it means a lot to this from the student perspective to see that class size is a kind of a priority of you all.
I've been in a kindergarten classroom with one too many kids. I understand part of it.
God bless them, those teachers.
Well, they're awesome little kids, but it's a lot.
A lot.
Okay,
We have a lot of random energy.
They
so
do.
thank you for leading that part of the conversation. I was feeling like I was talking too much. My view on this right now is I think we probably should continue to commit $1 million of the assigned fund balance towards keeping class sizes low, have you move towards the $2 million in alignment decisions. And that's what I would support.
That's the number I've mentally committed to with the information I have for now.
I would agree.
So just to clarify then, so when we come back, we'll use 6725, 3 and 2%, special ed cross subsidy reduction of 50%, ML of 25%, and then the other stuff is baked in there and things. And we will work to come up with a net $2 million of reduction, because we are also having some internal discussion around specifically around like capital budgets that we haven't had for a couple of years. You know, you can do that for a little bit, but you also need that. So if we bring that back, we just might need to find something else, but we'll identify at least $2 million in net reductions.
And those things will be subject to further questions and debate, correct?
So the finance committee will meet again. We will bring those recommendations to the March work session. And then the board can finalize that at the March meeting.
Is that what the vote, so not the April 10th meeting, the March business meeting that we just added?
You could.
Oh, we don't have a meeting on the March 10th. It goes to the March, sorry, I'm
So
missing my
March
calendars.
10th would be the work session to discuss
That day.
the 2 million, where that would be and what that would look like, and then.
Okay.
Finalizing
Yeah.
March, and then we vote in April on all the personnel stuff.
Okay.
Thanks,
I
Finance Committee.
think that reaches
lot of
a
work.
pretty decent balance of what we're trying to protect and go.
And I don't think we'll have to use $1 million. I can be wrong, but I don't think we will.
Okay. Thank you. Our next item is an update from the Public Engagement Committee, Member Simmons and Member Storley.
Okay, so Maggie and I met with Andrew and Lisa to continue discussion around the priorities that the board set forth for the Community Engagement Committee last summer at our workshop. So we have met 3 times to date in this school year. We met in July 28th, September 30th, and again on February 1st. And we have summarized some of the key things just some relevant history. So at the summer workshop, the board had identified 4 priority areas for community engagement during the school year. These included discussion around budget adjustments or alignment, a potential operating referendum, legislative priorities, and a competency-based framework. The committee determined at the beginning of the year, at one of our first meetings, that increased communication and information about competency-based frameworks was something that was being addressed in our district operational plan for this year. So this is just kind of a refresher. We've already brought these forward to the board, and the board agreed with this recommendation during the October 10th work session. And then the remaining priorities are in progress. So related to FY22 and 23 budget adjustments, we had a really good discussion around broadly the goals that we have identified both as a board and a committee, which is increasing that two-way dialogue with the community to help them understand the purpose of what we do, what is school financing. There's been some really meaningful progress already made to date through the school's website, and thanks to all of those who have worked on that. So there's a great school finance page right up on our website. We also talked about the community engagement goals. So as you remember, we have a framework that drives the language that we use to talk about our community engagement so that we are all on the same page about what that looks like. So we're working with the community to inform and consult with our community in these areas to understand what their perspective is as much as possible. And we do that right now through the emails that we receive, through board comments available, public comments available at the board meetings. And ultimately, if and when there's a referendum, the community engagement goal is empowerment, because we will do what the community decides at that time. So as part of these, the summary around that priority is to, one of the things that the administration has been working on is a partnership with the Center for, now I'm gonna CISO, but the Center for Effective School Operations about support for communications and engagement planning in these areas. So because this is an area that we're under-resourced in, this is an excellent partnership to support our efforts in engaging our community in the work that we have prioritized. So Maggie and I are going to be a part of a discussion with them later on this week. So that is kind of recommendation 1 put forth for the board to talk about today, but basically doing what we can as a board to support the administration's partnership with CISO to develop a plan for meaningful communications and community engagement related to the district's broad financial outlook and processes, as well as any potential 23-24 budget adjustments. I'll pause there for that issue and see if there are any questions.
Sorry, you said the Center for what?
Center for Effective School Operations.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So have you committed to a contract, like, with them to like help with that, like as a outsource?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Becky. And there were more detailed information in the Friday notes that was sent, I think, 2 weeks ago. But yes, as board representatives, it's not necessarily a board decision to do it or not, but to support the partnership and the collaboration with that.
Since it was coming out of administrative funding, it did not require board approval.
Right.
Okay. But they were very receptive to our feedback. Just some background that, others listening in may not be aware of. This, we've eliminated the communications position within our district over the years. And this is, a way to regain some of those services without the cost of having a dedicated employee.
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
And actually, that group partners really well with Morris Letterman too, who's going to do our community survey, which we're going to do a little bit earlier this year as well. so.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jason. That was another thing that Andrew and Lisa shared with us too, that Morris Leatherman is in the process. They've already developed a first draft of the biannual community survey. We'll all have an opportunity to look at that through its development. The findings report and summary presentation was linked in Friday notes. We have already, Maggie and I have already seen the first draft, and that working relationship with CISO that they have it between Morris Leatherman and those two to ensure alignment between the survey and our broader communication and engagement priorities. So they also will support the development of that to make sure that they're working closely together to meet what we've set forth as important to us.
And initially, this is just a temporary contract, 3 months, correct?
For a number of hours, yeah.
And we have the opportunity at the end of June to assess at that time and see if it's something that we want to continue to partner with if we have ongoing needs beyond June.
And they've helped us with a few previous things too.
Okay, that was my next question. Like, have you contracted with them before or used their services before you have? Okay, all right, and.
This is the first time I think
Easy to work with.
this is the first time I've heard of them on my time on the board. I don't know if you had prior experience to this past
No,
year.
we did some stuff in the fall.
Yeah, and just a general comment, I mean, I'm a marketing communications person. My experience is, I mean, the money that you spend on a little bit of communications consulting and the types of work that you're describing is well worth the investment, particularly when you've got an administration that's fairly stretched on that, underinvested on communication support, and with a large amount of strategic communications demands, both now and probably in the coming at least 12 months, I would guess. But
I like that they gave us the flexibility to buy packages as we saw fit, that we weren't committing to a 5-year plan that was very expensive, that we may not, then our needs may change. You know, this is small chunks for the projects we need, and we can move on with that depending on if our needs change.
yep.
It was conservative and very proactive in my mind.
Great.
Agree. So the second part of that is already noted is the biannual community survey. So we do this every 2 years in partnership with Morris Leatherman. Typically, this is something that is done more towards spring, and then we have a report coming in summer. But because of the needs and interests that we've identified, we as a community engagement committee are supporting an accelerated timeline of that biannual survey. So at this point, rough estimate would be instead of going out later, like towards May and getting a report in June, that we would be working to get that administered in March and then ultimately a report back to us in April or May. That will help us, have a better understanding of where our community sees our value and our strengths and what things interest them most in terms of investment, if that's something that they support. Questions with that one? Okay. And then the last item that we have been working on as a committee was to, and are bringing forth for the board's discussion, is to affirm our district legislative priorities for the 2023 legislative session. So because this is something that in the past we've talked about how to make this more effective. So we've kind of said, well, there's some of the things that we've done in the past kind of feel like checking a box, like these are our priorities, and we go, of course they are, and then we don't do anything with them. And so this year our focus has really been on how can we not only affirm what's important to the district, but also communicate that and see if there are ways to increase advocacy through our families and our community. So we are recommending 2 legislative priorities for our district for the 2023 legislative session. The first is to fully fund at 100% the special education cross-subsidy. And number 2 is to resist future mandates that do not provide appropriate corresponding funding. And so some districts you'll see, anywhere from 5 to 7 legislative priorities. We really discussed that if we focus on these 2, the impact that they will have is great. And so to keep it simple and hopefully be able to communicate these with our partners, as well as to hopefully increase advocacy in some of the ways that we're bringing forward tonight to talk about would be a goal. So Some of the ideas for engaging our community in that would be to take some of the things that Jason and Kyle have been really good about drafting emails to send to legislators, letters to the editor, and to share those with our key contacts or community partners. The easier we make it for people to take the language, know what the file is that we're referencing, and adapt it or modify it to make their own, give them the email addresses they need to send to, adapt, sign their name, and click, the more likely people are to, in our community, to be able to take action on it. And then another thing that we talked about was opportunities to, work within our district, and especially our staff who are working with families so closely, because there are families who have really impactful stories that are relevant to the work that is happening at the Capitol, and to see if there are ways that we can elevate and help families who may be interested in sharing their story get comfortable through things like an advocacy day or meeting with their legislators. Are there things that we can do as a board to support their development in that area? So I'm going to pause there, because then the broader community outreach ideas go beyond the legislative priorities. So I'll just pause there and see if there's reactions to the 2 legislative priorities that we propose, as well as any strategies for community engagement around those.
In general, those are great priorities. They're consistent with the resolution we passed last year around the federal government covering their commitments of it. That would actually facilitate some easing of the state burden too. But one way or the other, that's obviously a priority for our district. We've seen the impact of just that one legislative bill on our district. Now multiply that across, how many districts are there? A lot.
300 some.
Several hundred, right? I used to have it in my head, but I'm skipping a few other things tonight already, so. They're, just for the board, I mean, the Metropolitan, Association of Metropolitan School Districts?
MSD.
Yeah, so their legislative action day is March 8th, and Minnesota School Boards Association has a similar legislative action day on March 20th, and both I know are organizing or trying to get school board members to commit to some time and book appointments with their representatives. I'd actually, for this meeting tonight, I had invited Representative Garofalo, Representative Liddy, Senator Liskey, and Senator Duckworth. They are all suffering on the legislative floor this evening. They've texted me to let me know they weren't going to be able to make it, but they're very interested. Obviously, we're a school district that's done the homework now and has pretty good examples of what the impact of the bills that are moving through right now have. So I mean, if we can dovetail to the AMSD or the MSBA sessions, I would take a day off of work and go up to St. Paul and book time with legislators to try to have a conversation. If you guys want to come along too, and they probably more appreciate hearing more from students than from us even. So I'd be happy to help try to coordinate some of that. Anyway,
Agree.
your other ideas are great.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate that, Kyle, because I think that's what, one of the things that we talked about and are mindful of is that we all, have very full lives outside of the board. And so there's not an expectation that outside of our committee work and regular board meetings that anyone takes or has to do anything, but just opportunities that we, as we're able and willing, can try and be more proactive in some of the ways that we've done this, and only if available and wanting to.
Awesome.
So we'll do that. Okay, then. We will work together on those advocacy days. So then, more broadly speaking, one of the goals that we had identified was more proactive community outreach in terms of instead of connecting or kind of waiting for people to come to us when issues arise or things are directly impacting them, finding ways to strengthen our relationships, particularly with our very active and engaged community partners. So we had a long list of the many community partners that we have in Farmington, and we are lucky because we have so many that care about our district and our families and our students. We have faith organizations, we have PTPs, we have parent ambassadors, we have youth athletic associations, we have co-curriculars like band and choir. I mean, we have no shortage of people that care and are willing to support our district and our students. So we wanted to bring forward to the board ideas for brainstorming, and some of the ideas that we thought would be a good starting place would be to have a school board member join a partners meeting one time annually. So, if we look at the list of some of our partners, does any of us already have relationships, maybe with a PTP here or parent ambassador? Is there anywhere that there's already a natural alignment or a relationship that we could volunteer to one time a year, stop by on the board's behalf, introduce ourselves and get to know them a little more deeply? Sending an introduction email to partner organizations. So again, making that line of communication come from one of our representatives on the board instead of, well, find us, our contact info's on the website, particularly around things that may be of interest to them and trying to tailor messages towards their work. And then finally, looking at ways to identify school board members at public events, even as something as simple as name tags. So, some people know who we are, but we agreed that we've been at some places and people might not, but they would maybe take an opportunity to visit with us if they knew that. And
Specifically
so,
when we are attending in a board capacity. Yes.
right, right.
Not necessarily when you're at Parents' Night Out at Kelts, yes.
Yeah.
So those are some of the ideas we had of just kind of starting small where it doesn't feel overwhelming, but seeing how that goes, and seeing if others on the board are interested in that.
Yeah, I think it's great ideas. I mean, Gorman and I can probably arm wrestle over North Trail Elementary, but yeah, I mean, I'm good. You can have that one, but
Yeah, thanks.
if
I still have a kiddo there, so.
you still have a child there. I've graduated from North Trail. Actually, I answered Dan Pickens' call for the Friendly Presence at the high school. I would encourage anyone else to do that too, if you can. My goal is to at least get there once a month, wander around and talk to people.
I know that we had some opportunities through buildings inviting us in. We have our boardwalks, but those are more observational. So, one of the principals had invited us in to attend a staff meeting and just say hi. So those types of things too, where there's more, less like watching you, but more informal could be other opportunities we could think about through the year too.
We utilize our badges as a name tag versus.
They don't say your role, though. It just basically says, the district, but it doesn't, in your name, but it doesn't have anything regarding your role. Or am I working as a para today? I mean, it's,
Lori's gonna order name. She's working on name badges, so.
They're a couple bucks, I'm sure.
No, they're a little bit more than that, but we've gone circle well. They're nice magnetic ones.
we got your reflective vest.
That would be great. Just glow.
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that you took some time to do some kind of brainstorming on like what would it look like, because I think of that so often, like I'm at a band concert or I'm, at even 4-H or, whatever, and like people don't necessarily know that.
They remembered
I'm
you
on
in
the school
November, and then after that, they
Yeah,
might
no,
remember you.
but like they maybe didn't even know me then, like right even after the election, Patriotic Day, I'm like the welcome committee there. I'm like, people don't even know that, you know what I mean? Like, but I want them to know so that down the road, they like, hey, I know a
Connect,
gal,
visibility.
she looked approachable. I could maybe talk to her about my concerns or how to.
And it's with the intent to allow them to engage us in that capacity, right?
Yeah, they do so much for our district, and one of the things that we had participated in last year around community engagement was just broadly for the state of Minnesota had said, how many of the districts, this was a big training, said, how many of you just think of these when you need something from them, or, they hear from the district when they're supporting something. So is there a way that you can, strengthen your relationships with them? So it's not just knocking on the door when you need something, but recognizing their value and partnership outside of, those capacities and more in an ongoing way, so.
Could I recommend that we all just send you and Maggie an email saying which partner institutions we would like to
That'd be great.
Yeah,
own or have a relationship with, and you can sort out?
gaps or,
Yeah, if there's anything in
others.
particular that you're already attached to, that you're going to be attending anyway, or anything you have a special interest in. Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Awesome.
That was it for us. Anything else you have?
Thank you for taking that time. Our next items on the agenda are some policy discussions. Actually, we didn't arm wrestle over who was going to lead the conversation. You want me to do it? Okay, well, there's 4 policies for review. Most of them are policy updates or revisions that MSBA has made to model language. They may or may not need further discussion, and the final is bringing back the professional conduct policy that was introduced in November last year, and I can give a little background on that when we get to it, but I think we can just take it top to bottom. The first one is Policy 403, which is discipline, suspension, and dismissal of school district employees. The policy draft is included in the board packet. This is actually just as a clear case of they've just simplified some of the language and cleaned up some of the legal references, at least supporting the policy language. I mean, in general, this is the guidebook for how various complaints and other things are investigated and managed by the administration. I don't have anything more to say on it than that. Are there any questions? Okay. The next one is Policy 413, which is harassment and violence. Similar situation here where this is largely a handful of typographical updates. I know there's some interest in this policy, but I'm not sure if there's questions. There's probably not a lot of questions about the changes, but this is also, the policy guidebook for how complaints around harassment, violence, other acts of bias are typically managed, but I think the issue is that they arise to a higher threshold. Any comments?
I just want to add that these policies are driven by, a lot of these come right from Minnesota, the Minnesota School Board Association. So they're not necessarily just made up by the school board and the administration.
Right. So they represent model language and best practices for all of the issues for the
A
most
lot
part.
of districts.
Yep. Okay. And the next one is Policy 414. This is mandated reporting of child neglect and physical or sexual abuse. This looks like a whole lot of changes, but if you do examine, it's largely a lot of moving text around and putting things, kind of an organization of the structure. I had a question at one point because there's some language in here around, behavior with due regard to a child's culture, and I just don't understand. I mean, MSBA's answer came back, but that's just in the statute. So that's where a lot of language just comes from. It's in the statute that way. If you're looking at it online, you can see my note there.
Well, and to that point, Kyle, a lot of times you actually have to go back to the statute to really understand what the language is. Sometimes it's just it's pieces of it too.
We've
which
seen that
makes
in a
it
couple of
difficult.
places, yeah.
Yeah.
Any questions here? Okay. And then the last policy is the draft of Policy 1021, which is around professional conduct for school district employees. I introduced this back in November. I wanted to find my notes. At that time, I noted the purpose was to provide some additional board-backed guidance around some areas where there was consensus that the board believed need some clarity. Since then, the policy committee in 2022 reviewed a draft and heard input from board members of the community, some staff, and incorporated changes. It was referred to the district's lawyer with a couple of questions around whether or not there was redundancy with other policy or other legal risks around any of the language. The lawyers came back and said there was not redundancy with other policies or other risks. They had some of their comments around potential other cross-references and other comments, but more or less those main substantive issues were addressed negatively. The policy committee again reviewed it, 3 weeks ago? And so we believe that this draft is ready for final board consideration.
I am still questioning, because when I was on the policy committee, I was part of that previously. if we need this policy at all. Like, I genuinely don't think that we do. I feel like it was a reactionary measure at the time, given what was happening in the district. And I feel like it's, what's the word? It's setting things up to not go well, I feel like, especially for teachers.
Agreed.
I feel like it's pigeonholing things, or it's just going to, I mean, like, expected to exercise good judgment and professionalism. I mean, some of this is already outlined in other policies too. Common sense, if you're an educator in general. And 3, it's open to interpretation, a lot of interpretation. And so you get one person that disagrees with something, then we're gonna kind of open Pandora's box against, I think, a lot of teachers.
I think the most problematic part is Section D, which is where we're getting a lot of community feedback and where we've continued to get feedback, and I've reviewed the edit history on this as well. But I'm of your mindset, Jacqueline. I think this puts a target on our educator and staff back that opens for more scrutiny and not necessarily in a helpful way. So at this point, I don't support the language as it's written.
Do you have proposed changes or
I've
just not a
been-
need for the policy? Do you guys
I've kicked
think?
around a couple of ideas. This is certainly not ready for, full discussion because it was throttled by my 14-year-old. But what we talked about was and this was with the intent that in certain classroom subjects, history, for example, there can be educational and thought benefit, especially in the secondary years when you're developing a lot of your frontal cortex, on discussing more polarizing topics, but done in a way where it's not meant to target the educator or any particular student regarding your beliefs. It's not meant to, it's meant to explore the subject in a way that examines both sides, right? So
Fully agree.
the language that I was playing with that still needs work according to my 14-year-old would basically say, the addition onto Section D would be exploring concepts of disparities in the human experience based on physical, personal, or spiritual beliefs in a non-biased learning environment should not be considered political. So the ability to explore these topics and look at them in a non-biased way, but to examine both sides shouldn't automatically come with a target at the educator or the other students that are bringing them up.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said. The language in the policy is no longer about political, though. It's really just about content and concepts that are unrelated to instructional goals. So I would also, I hope that our classes do have those types of conversations in a structured environment as part of instructional goals, so they wouldn't necessarily wouldn't be issues that were related or cause conflict with the policy.
When anyone else read it, did they feel like that this did give them the same impression that it opened up for further hardships for our educators? I mean, it sounds like Jacqueline and I both had that concern come up. Did anyone else feel that way?
I mean, I kind of see both because to your point, given what we were going through at the time, it seemed like there was an expectation that we wanted to be responsive to as a community, to review our policies, identify, what existed. But I tremendously respect your position as an educator. In fact, when you were running, I was like, this is why I want to hear your perspective, because I think, especially given the climate for our educators with them leaving at unprecedented numbers, that I don't want to contribute to a feeling of additional unnecessary oversight. If it's something that is already expected under their current contract and their professional conduct, and something that we've existed without for how many years, and had appropriate policies in place to respond to any instances of behavior that would need to be addressed, then I don't want to just be reactive either and put it in place.
I question whether we do, that's the problem. And because I've, throughout most of my first 2 years, I've talked to parents who have, when they've run into something, I'll give a specific example, but I don't think it causes particular issue. But, there was a class where videos were being shown around, COVID-19 vaccine that had nothing to do with that subject matter, had nothing to do with the learning objectives of that class. The answer was not to deal with the content or the materials. The answer was to move the child into a different class. And so I don't feel, based on my observation that there are sufficient policies or practices in place to cover some of those challenges, and that's not something that should make our educators feel like a target is on their back. If anything, the goal here was to provide some tools so that the proper conversations are taking place between administrators and educators, so that the appropriate responses can be taken into account. I think there's some tension around the concept of agency in the district, which is awesome. But I think sometimes that can be we let people do what they want to do. And there are still issues within classrooms, and like I said, I've had enough parents bring questions and comments to me, and I always refer them off to the principal. It's not something I feel that I need to take ownership of, but it has built up to, in my sense, that the administration could use some more guidance, some board back guidance around paragraph D, which is, let's just keep to the subject matter and focus on the subject matter. I agree with you 100%, by the way. I think that critical thinking is basically what you're describing. Right. The idea of to examine controversial issues is not something that any of us should stray from, and is something particularly in the high school that's of value and very germane to public education goals, and I think the mission of the district. So I don't want to have a policy that anyone gets the wrong idea, this is shutting down conversation about important topics that our students are going to go to college or into the workforce and have to confront anyway, right? We want to build critical thinking around those subject matters.
And I love it done in a safe, supportive environment. I consider that it certainly may not have a place in math class, but it does have
bingo.
Certainly have appropriate context in subjects, that would lean into that. I also had a little bit of a concern regarding the clause in Part D that talks about into the instructional areas of classrooms. I just feel like it's also open to a lot of interpretation. My 14-year-old immediately said, so my teacher that has like 6 pride flags in a move of support for, students that are struggling with their identity there, is that considered a violation? I said, when I read this, I would wonder if that's a violation. So there's a reason this has been debated multiple times, and there's still room for other people to bring opinions, because I agree the interpretation's loose. I think the intent is great. I just see that this leaves loopholes for troublemakers.
So my personal opinion is that, this is my opinion, I don't necessarily feel like 6 pride flags in a math class is needed. That's not related to the instructional goals of math. You're there to learn math. And I don't have any problem with any teacher or administration or administrator supporting any advocacy groups or anything like that. It's just, is that the right time and place to be having that discussion or invoking that critical thinking about that in a math class?
If that's the
If
example.
it's not discussed, mine was, if it's hanging in the room, is it a violation? Is the teacher saying, obviously this is something I support, is that, it falls into the district standards. Are we saying that's okay or that's not okay?
Something I'd like to add is the choice to have pride flags in a classroom is something that the teacher chose to do on their own. And I feel like when a teacher kind of decorates their room in a way that is meaningful to them, it also makes the space more, like accepting to a student. So not necessarily with any flags, but maybe they have cool lights on the side of their room or something like that. But it just really provides a safe space for students to kind of feel comfortable. When we enter kind of a blank classroom, it's just kind of, this teacher's here. Whereas like when it's their classroom, like you're kind of in their home and you're gonna show respect. And so it kind of brings more of like a homey sense to that education process. And whether it's something, like that's their perspective, but not necessarily something that they're gonna discuss in that class.
I appreciate your perspective, Kennedy, that's great. And I agree with making it feel comfortable and inviting. But again, if somebody who walks into the room doesn't believe in something that's displayed, that's not really a comfortable situation for them either. So we have to think about being all-inclusive for all of our students, right?
I like the policy, and I think D, as it's written, is valid because it starts out saying that we recognize the importance of diverse views and like it uses critical thinking. We want to encourage that among our thinkings. And two, like I have circled, like, again, we're just saying, like, if it's not related to the course content, then we don't need to be having these conversations. So just everything that we
You guys have to understand that
just said.
there are organic conversations that happen when you talk about other random topics. Like, it's just a natural conversation that happens with students. So as a teacher, you're just expecting them to just be like, no, we can't talk about it. Like, that's what you want them to do to stifle students who want to have these conversations. I don't support this policy at all. You can change it all you want. I'm not going to support it. That's just me. It is stifling teachers, and it's completely unnecessary to me. And I just feel very strongly about it, so.
Thanks for sharing.
Those thoughts always bloom up at interesting times in a developing mind, and I agree. Within the appropriate context of the classroom goals, but I also want a way to foster those thoughts, those discussions, that learning, that thought development, exposing other students to those ideas without it seeming biased. I don't know if this language accomplishes that goal. I think I'm kind of in the middle with it.
And to me, it seems like we're writing this policy to appease parents and not our learners. Like, this is to make sure we don't piss off parents by, because they don't like something that's being taught in the classroom and not necessarily what's good for the learner.
Student-centered.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Because I know that this was something that you gave an example for, a really tangible example. So if we had had the policy in place at the time of the example you just shared about, the videos, do you have a vision for how having this policy in place would have changed the response from the administration or us?
Well,
Like,
what I would have liked to have heard the response would have been a conversation about what objective was being served by showing, videos that were actually, when I watched them, they were also riddled with errors. What was the goal of showing that in this class? How did that serve the goals of, for example, right? How did that serve what the learning objectives are? I don't want to get too deep into it, but
those conversations didn't take place, from your understanding?
no, the student was assigned to a passion project, and the rest of the students still had to kind of wade through that stuff. If the parent doesn't bring it forward, no one knows about things.
But what if they would have given you a legitimate reason of, like, these were the objectives and why it
That's a
was
great
shown, and you
conversation.
didn't agree with it still? Is it still wrong?
In my sense, it's not on the parent's judgment at that point. It's a conversation that I would love to see the administration having with educators in the district. That's all. The remediation side of this policy is about investigating, evaluating, remediating as appropriate. If it's determined that it's not an issue, then it's clearly not an issue. It's just, I think it's a tool for ensuring that different types of conversations are taking place with the goal of improving instruction overall for students.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, Jason, but since you're administrator of this district, what's your sense in terms of, are there gaps, or do you think the conversations are being had when, I know I've been privy
Can't
to,
speak
as a
to
board,
the
we've seen
specific
the response to some
circumstance
of
Kyle's
these, but.
talking about, but we get questions all the time about what's going on in class. And the first thing we do, and again, I'm not living and breathing it, but when I was a principal, the first thing I did is go down and ask the teacher, what is the why behind that? Why? Because again, if you don't have a why, then we have bigger issues behind why that's being said. We've also tried to work with our staff to be really proactive to not only communicate with administrators when there might be something that is muddy or controversial, however you want to phrase it up, but to let the administrators know, but also communicate that to families ahead of time and try to do a better job of that. Now, does that happen all the time? It's areas that we try to work on and things like that. So in this day and age, it's going to be impossible to be able to determine what is and what isn't, because that's all, a lot of it is perception and feelings. And the question becomes, can you answer why you decided to do what you did? And those are the answers that administrators have to be able to get and answer and work with families on. So does this help that? I don't know, but that is a fundamental question that our administrators need to be asking when something goes on and when a question goes on. I think the other thing we need to be cautious about is when things are taken in bits and pieces. The board saw in an email that was shared about when a screenshot of a singular part of an assignment was, and it can look bad. You know, and until you get the other parts of it to see of what all it entailed, it gets hard as well. And so there, I mean, so there's lots of that there that just make it hard. So do I have an opinion? You know, it outlines some things, it talks about some things. A lot of the stuff, I know when I talked to Kyle about this, it pulled out of some of the professional pieces that are in statute and things like that and codified that. But I think to the ultimate question, when there are concerns about things like that, our staff and our administrators need to be out. So why did we choose to do that? When it came into place, what was the outcome? And then we do, and I'm not saying your example is a perfect option, right? But are there are there alternate ways to access the same experience? Maybe not this, because we've gotten so stuck into, there's only one way to do something and only one way to experience it. There's multiple ways, right? It's not so much about the old school curriculum that we do, it's about what's the experience. And so if you have a general experience of critical thinking, assessing information around something, and then making a determination around it, that can be done lots of different ways. And so if it's introduced in a way that, you know, isn't great, then can we find another way to do that? But I think those are things that need to be answered and questioned. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, because I kind of forgot where we went. But I think to the point is that ultimately, we have to ultimately, like anything, we have to be able to answer why we did what we did. And that's where the thought has to come into it. And if we can't, then that's a problem.
To your point, Jacqueline, I guess reading that, I think about just organic conversations just keep replaying in my head. And I'm thinking, if an organic conversation comes up, I don't see that relating to this policy, because this policy is really on development of curriculum and lessons plans.
That component is, yeah.
Right, and so, like, if two students strike up a conversation about this, that, and the other thing, I wouldn't expect the teacher to interject and give their personal biased beliefs and opinions. I think that's what we're trying to stray from is, you guys can, if you guys can have a healthy conversation, fine, but again, we're there to learn, we're there to fulfill our obligation to our learners to teach them based on our curriculum and lesson plans. So if our kids get off topic, it is in any subject, I would assume it's your job to keep them on topic and keep them focused on what you're teaching. Otherwise, you're losing control of your classroom. So I guess that's where I'm struggling to see that organic conversation come up that's unrelated to instructional goals.
Well, I teach social studies, so this is something that happens naturally all the time. Like we are literally talking, you could be talking about something from the 1950s and we're gonna relate it to something that's happening today, and it's gonna be a class discussion.
That's part of your instruction goals, right? That's part of the goal of your.
But you talk to a parent that doesn't like what's talked about, they might just say, no, that wasn't, you were talking about apartheid, why are we talking about civil rights and this, and you know what I mean? Like,
You're afraid there'd be too much, you're concerned there's too, and this is a good respectful conversation, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because when we've had this, it's been fairly pro forma, and so I appreciate the dialogue. And what you're concerned about is that there becomes too much of a, when I say, I wanna hear a conversation took place between an education administrator, and to Jason's point, ask, why did we do that? You're concerned, though, that it goes the other direction, where I'm concerned that it becomes, oh, let's just move the kid who doesn't like it. You're concerned that it becomes a professional liability to the teacher.
Yes.
Through no fault of their own. Am I relaying that concern back?
correct, yes.
But, and I'll just add another part of the administrative piece of things. There are things that come to us that we don't have to go run to the teacher and answer. We can answer those, and there are things that never get to the teacher. And again, this policy is not gonna change that part of it, because we know and we can answer those things. There's the things that are like, oh, okay, that's different, we haven't, right? That will probably be, but there's other things too where when you lay out and get that we can answer without that as well, so.
And just to clarify, syllabus and course goals are going to be easily accessible to parents for every course their child takes?
I think they are now. I mean,
You
I
know,
can see them in school.
it's a general piece and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like, just from my, like, personal anecdote, I've definitely had like good conversations in class for English, social studies, U.S. history, civics. I certainly have those conversations in classrooms, and I feel like they are helpful, and they don't push boundaries or like they don't push limitations. There's still boundaries, but we explore those complexities, and yeah, syllabuses are always available. So, and for me personally, I've noticed just as like an upperclassman that you go from having a syllabus signed by a parent and signed and you have to sign it, and now like for me I feel like it's just like, okay, this is now you as a student taking responsibility. Like you don't even need it signed by a parent, like you need, this is your classwork. And that's what I've seen as like, I know what I'm taking in the courses, and I personally haven't had any issues with bias, but I can see where your concern comes from. But that's just me.
One thing I'd like to add on to that is kind of with our coursework and our syllabus, or syllabi, I don't know. But the information that we're receiving in our classes and our learning, a lot of that has a lot of real world applications and more than you'd really think. Like English, so many things when we address like counter arguments and think of the opposing side, if we do that with natural topics that come up and you think about both sides, you want to write a strong essay, well, that's something that you just learned in English class that you're thinking of how someone else is speaking, maybe thinking of their side. Or in civics, a class that we all have to take as freshmen. It teaches you a lot about local government and kind of why people might be thinking different ways than you. And like they open up those, I know that's social studies, but they open up a lot of those wider topics, and that is something that happens naturally, but also it is through the learning and through the education that might be on the syllabus.
So that's in your content or concepts related to instructional goals. So you're not deviating from that.
Right.
And I think it's very important. I think that's exactly what should be happening in the classroom. I agree.
Are there, I don't know if we've exhausted that paragraph. Are there other questions or concerns around?
I'm interested to see like the last sentence, administration will develop guidelines and or procedures in furtherance of this paragraph, like what that looks like, what those, like might be like helpful and give more direction to actually, what does this look like? So.
I don't know how that would be possible. Like, honestly, like, it's just, again, Pandora's box of every possible situation you can imagine.
Yeah, the district's lawyers actually provided some suggested starting point for that. It's not as Pandora's box or subjective as you'd think. It's fairly straightforward, but.
I can tell you, if I were an educator, I would suddenly have a 14-page syllabus that included a really big disclaimer in it. Sorry.
No, that's fair. No, I mean it. I appreciate the conversation because I'm always afraid of writing something in a vacuum and not hearing what others are saying. And there's the reaction that some have put on social media, and then there's the conversation I'm having with y'all. It's a different level of dialogue, and I appreciate it. Okay. So next steps probably are to go back to the policy committee and see where we want to go with this. And I've got a couple of ideas, and we can bring that back at another point. I think that's probably where this should be at this point. Because I don't want to, okay.
Thanks for your work on it, all of them.
Yeah.
Policy committee.
I'm getting back out to the agenda. Actually, I think that is the end of our agenda, unless there's public comment. I don't think anyone signed up for public comment. So with that, I guess we just needed a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting at 7:10.
Second.
Motion by Doyle, second by Simmons. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.